Hello, my name is China and welcome to ArtistAnd. Today we're going to be looking at three different types of watercolour paper because when I was starting out and trying to figure out what was a good type of paper, I brought a lot of shit ones. So what I want to do is run through some different types, what to look out for and what's going to be good for your artwork. We're also going to be looking at how good they are with masking tape and making sure that it doesn't rip the paper. So let's see how it goes. So I've got with me three different types of paper. We have 250 GSM watercolor paper, 300 GSM cold press paper, 240 GSM cartridge paper. So these are ones that I just have in my studio, and all of them claim that they are good for watercolor. But let's see, because some of them I'm not convinced. So you might be wondering, what does GSM stand for? Well, it basically means grams per square meter. And just to give you a comparison, a printing piece of paper, a standard printing piece of paper, is about 80 GSM. And that's quite thin, it's really smooth. Whereas these, 240, 250, 300, these are much, much thicker. And you can tell as well just by the thickness of it. So just getting to know your paper is really helpful. But also the way it feels. So let's talk about the way it feels now. If I was drawing, I definitely want something super smooth, but for doing watercolor paper, I want something a little bit thicker. Now, this one, a 300 GSM, is really, really rough. I do have a question mark over that one, but let's give it a go and see how that fares. This one, the 250, this is super smooth, so whenever I'm buying a sketchbook, I do like to touch it before I buy it. Touch before you buy, right? And then the 240 feels incredibly smooth, so I know that that's already going to be great for pencil, but because it's cartridge paper, is that going to be any good for watercolor? So let's give it a go. So let's start with the 240 GSM. Okay, so all I'm going to do is get a bit of masking tape. Now, this is a very bog standard masking tape, probably from Wilko for a whole £1. And all I'm going to do is slap that in the middle. The brushes that I have, we have this lovely Raven one, so this has a really amazing head. And this is a number 8, which is, I think, a round head. It's called a round-headed brush. I should know that. And this is called this is number 6. So we're just looking for a couple of different brushes just to try a few different things. In terms of paints, so I've got my watercolor. They are Derwent. Really, really good brand. I absolutely love these watercolors. I've only recently started getting into these specific ones, so would highly recommend, and I'll leave the link in the chat. So first of all, let's see what it's like for absorbing water. So all I'm going to do is just pick a color. Doesn't really matter too much which one it is. Just get that nice and wet because there's a lot of water in watercolor. So let's just go over that line as well. Now it feels quite smooth, which is good. So far no problems, but let's try a gradient. So I want to see how quick it's going to absorb the water. So if I add a little bit of colour up there, start to blend that. Okay, not so bad, not bad at all with the soft blending, but that's a lot of water. So what happens if I reduce the amount of water? Is that going to absorb it too quickly? So let's say I have this line and I don't know, I need to check my phone for 2 seconds. So I basically want to see if this edge is able to reignite itself so I can blend it. Okay. Not great. So let's see if I can rub that a bit more. No. Okay. So that absorbed it really quick. So I want to try and do this test on the other two pieces of paper. So let's give that a go. I'm just going to let the paint dry before I peel off the masking tape as well. Okay, fab. So this is the 250 GSM. This is the watercolor paper from Hobbycraft. So, you know, it is Hobbycraft, it is lower end, but let's give it a go anyway. So we'll do the same thing again. So we'll get a nice wet red. And that, I mean, no problems with that one. It's nice and wet. So let's try a little gradient. Okay, good. So already I can feel that it's not absorbing the paint straight away, but the only way we'll be able to tell is by a thicker paint, so less water. Let's do that here. So give it a few seconds. Let's see what happens to the edges. So, you know, going on my phone because I'm an addict. And then let's just try. Okay, so it's not soaking up the water straight away. It could be a number of things. So it could be that I've added too much water at the start, but I doubt it. I can feel that it's not soaking up that water because it is watercolor paper, so you need that extra few seconds to take it in. And I really like the texture. You know, it's not warping too much. There's a slight bend in it, but we'll try the warping on the next half in a second. For now, let's have a look at the 300 GSM. Okay, so same thing again. Let's get a nice liquidy red. Ooh, okay. So we can see that this paper is really coarse, and you can see little pockets of paint, which I'm not a big fan of. Let's try a gradient. So red up there. Move it down there. Okay. So it doesn't absorb the water that quickly, which is good, but you can really see these pockets of paint. But as I say that, I'm looking over here and it has kind of dispersed a little bit, so maybe it just needs a little bit of time. I don't know. Let's get a purple, and then we'll just go on there. So that's nice and thick. So we'll give that a few seconds. There are some pools of paint in there, but that has really dispersed, so I'm unsure what to think at this stage. Okay, so hopefully that's the same amount of time. It's around 5 seconds. Okay, it's not bad. It's somewhere in between, isn't it, from the first one and the second one, but it really is helping to move that paint. So there's a faint line from the original paint, but again, it's got this pooling effect, so unsure. Not my favourite so far, but we'll let it dry and we'll come back to that first piece of paper. We'll do a wetness test and then we'll let that dry and peel off the tape. So let's see how that goes. All right, so this looks horrific. That looks okay, but there's not really much going on. So let's do a bit of a gradient here. So I'm going to just really sweep this brush all over with a colour. So I'm getting it soaking wet. This brush can hold so much water, so I don't even need to do that. I'm just being dramatic. Let's do a gradient. So why don't I use this red that's already there then? And I'll go red on the top and purple on the bottom. So we'll sweep that across, and then by the time I'm done my purple, it shouldn't really dry because there's a lot of water in this brush, so fingers crossed. Let's get a bit more. Okay, so from the bottom, work my way up. It's mixing in the middle. Okay, not bad. So I'm looking out for the ability to hold the paint and any warping that might happen. So far so good. It is cartridge paper, so it is thick, and really there wasn't that much water on there, but I can feel that it's just starting to curve up. So the main test is when it dries, is that going to flatten out? Because good watercolor paper should. So let's have a go at the other type. Okay, so here's a 250 again. There's a little bit of warping going on, which has created this pool of water there. So it's basically warped it and then pushed that paint up. That means that that paint has now just kind of wobbled itself around, and you can see that there's an outline from that puddle. So not ideal. Let's see. Get this red. Oops, paint my table as well. Okay, there's loads of water in this one. So because it's 10 GSM thicker, technically, it should be a bit stronger. But judging by that pool earlier, I'm unsure. Obviously, when you're doing your own watercolor, you will tape it down. So that does help. It does help to keep to keep the paper flat on the surface. But you can see already that this is really picking up. Well, maybe you can't see. I'll get a little angle from the side. But you can see there it really is picking up on the side of the paper. So not ideal because that's already creating pools. You see at the top and the bottom there. So again, we'll see how it dries. It might not be the end of the world. Okay, and last but not least, the 300 GSM. So let's test its warpability. Yeah, I really don't like that finished effect on the left-hand side. Okay, it does hold the paper well though. Give it a few seconds, see if there's any sort of bend in the paper. But on the left, you can really see the texture of the paper, which could work good in some things, but I'm not too sure if I like it for my artwork. So far so good. It's just bending ever so slightly, but I think that one's going to flatten out quite well. So I'll give it a few seconds. We'll let it dry, and then we'll peel off the tape and see if there's any ripping in the masking tape. Okay, so back to the 240 GSM. It's dry to the touch. It's a tiny bit cold, which means it's a little bit damp, but that's fine. So this side is the same temperature. I can feel the warping, and I'll show you just on the side here. So I don't know if you can see it, but it's basically wave there, wave there, wave there. Not ideal. You can see the paper is lifting up a little bit, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Okay, so let's peel it off. I'm seeing if there's any rip on the paper itself. So that's pretty clean actually. There's a tiny bit of paint coming through underneath, but that could have been the fact that I haven't pushed it down hard enough. But this side, really happy with how that looks. Overall, not bad, but I don't think this is made for watercolor paper. I think you can kind of get away with it, but not ideal. Okay, so this one is taking longer to dry, which I think is a good thing in watercolor because it gives you extra time, and I do like that, but because of the warping here, I can literally get my little finger underneath. That's pushing the paint all over, so you can see that this blend has now changed. It's quite a nice effect, I'm not going to lie, but I would have to really tape that down to secure it a bit better, but you can tell you'd still get this warping. Okay, it's dry to the touch along the line, so let's give it a go. I'm quite impatient. Okay, again, really good. There's no ripping in the paper. That's exactly what we want. And the lines are much crisper. Teeny tiny divots, but I think that's fine. Very, very crisp lines. So all in all, the paper is all right. It does look quite nice, but if I wanted it to be perfect, then it's not ideal, is it? Right, let's look at the final one. Hopefully that's dried by now as well. Christ, look at this. That is vile. That looks so different to all of the others. So the paper is a tiny bit warped. This is just arching ever so slightly. That's fine, but it just looks disgusting. Let's see. Let's just go straight for the tape. So surprisingly, it's a good grip despite there being little air pockets going down there. Again, surprisingly crisp lines because of all these little divots. But the overall look, I just think is awful. So let's get them all back. Let's do a proper comparison. So this was the first one. This is the second one, and then I'll put the third one here. I hate to say it. This first one has done surprisingly well. Remember, that's cartridge paper. It's not... well, it said you can use watercolour on it, but it does absorb the paint really quickly, especially when it came to giving us a bit of extra time and then going back to blend it in. Other than that, if you were to work quite quick, this is holding out really, really well. The paint texture looks great. It's super smooth because it's absorbing that paint super quick. And if you're quick enough, you can get a nice effect there. No issues really on the tape. Tiny bit of bleeding there, but that could have been my error rather than the paper's. So I'd probably give that... I'll give that a 7 out of 10 because this edge does bother me. But all in all, pretty good. Now, the second one, this feels better. It has a little bit of texture, but it's still really smooth. I quite liked the edging there if I wanted to go back and make it soft. I don't mind this texture, but again, if I wanted that to be perfectly smooth, I would get quite annoyed. That being said, I think watercolour, well, the beauty of watercolour is that it does these things. You know, it's like imperfect. Just seeing how the paint interacts with each other is something quite stunning. So I'm not against it. However, if this was my blend, I would again be annoyed with that because I'd want it to be dark at the top, super light at the bottom. But because of the warping, which is really annoying, then it's created these weird pools. So with this, I'd definitely be aiming to tape it down super strong. And we know there's not any ripping on the paper either, so that's good. So I do prefer this over that, but I've just listed more, more, negatives about it. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10 as well. So that's the 250 GSM from Hobbycraft. And then finally, this piece of shit. This is rubbish. It's super warped. Well, it's not super warped. It is warped, but the texture's awful. The paint is just dispersed everywhere. I thought maybe it stood a chance because that ended up being quite nice, but as soon as you add loads of water on it, there's just chaos. It's just paint in chaos, and you can see all the pockets of paper, so I really don't like that. I don't like the texture. It feels rough, so maybe 300 GSM is just too coarse. Or maybe it's because it's cold pressed and it couldn't quite flatten out all of those pockets. So this one, I'd probably give this one a 4 out of 10, which means these two are a winner. So 240 GSM or 250 GSM, I think these are the best ones for watercolours. So I hope that helped. I hope that gives you a bit of insight into what to look for watercolour paper. How much does it warp? How smooth is the texture? That one was a key one for me. And how quickly does it absorb the water? I would say the Hobbycraft one, I've done a few paintings with that. And I absolutely love it. So definitely tape down your edges. Make sure that you're preventing that warping as much as possible. But it just gives you a bit more time to play with the paints. And the texture is quite nice, actually. So I'd recommend the 250 GSM. Now, if you liked this video and if you found it quite useful, please like, subscribe, and let us know what you want us to review, because I'd really love to show you what to buy before you do it. I think that's super helpful. And of course, follow us on Instagram, follow us on wherever you want. Thanks ever so much, and have a great day, everybody.